Hello everybody, today we'll be talking about globalization, its rise, its promise, and its problems. Your goals for today are to be able to describe what globalization is, to explain why globalization has increased over time, to talk about the big changes that ushered in the age of digital globalization, or the age we're in right now, and finally, to talk about the major promises and also the major problems offered by globalization and global free trade. Globalization is the increasing cultural and economic interconnectedness of human civilization. And as we'll see, globalization has progressed throughout human history. One of the main factors that makes globalization possible is better technology. As technology gets better, it gets easier to transport and it gets easier to communicate across natural barriers like oceans, deserts, or even just plain distance. Advances in technology make global trade easier and also more profitable. And they also make the exchange of ideas and of cultural values easier. So all of this stuff is made easier by technology. Globalization can also be influenced by political structures. Basically, cultural and economic ideas are more easily exchanged during times of peace and stability than they are during times of chaos and turmoil. For example, there was a flourishing long-distance trade that connected all of Asia in the ancient time period when Rome and Han China were flourishing. On the other hand, later on, there was very little trade going on in the early Middle Ages, and people had to rely on self-sufficient local systems like the manorial system that we learned about. A number of historians have argued that globalization has been a long process that has unfolded in stages throughout human history. And so the schemes used by different historians vary, but I've got a 5-part scheme that basically shows the different big historical stages of globalization. So the first stage, which makes up most of human existence, was that of decentralized local societies. And here the very primitive technology, stuff like being able to speak to one another, build primitive boats, basically means that human beings are limited to small independent groups, little bands of hunter-gatherers mostly. From around 5000 BC to 1492 AD, we see the rise of a more interconnected society in the form of regional units and regional empires. So in this period, the rise of certain kinds of technology like writing, the use of pack animals, and the building of roads allows for regional empires to arise that also are able of engaging in long-distance trade with one another. The most famous example of this being the Silk Road between ancient Rome and Han China. The third stage, the one we've already talked about a lot, is the stage that unfolds from 1492 to 1800, and this is the period of limited globalization. And basically what happens here is the use of new technologies by European explorers and traders, like the compass and cartography and the printing press, allows for a global system of trade and also for a global exchange of ideas. The stage that follows after that, beginning with the Industrial Revolution, is the era of industrial globalization. And here, technologies like steamships, the telegraph, and airplanes allow for the rise of global empires and also for increasing global trade. More and more stuff gets traded as the ability to transport stuff across oceans becomes less and less rare. And finally, the era in which we are currently living, digital globalization, is characterized by extremely rapid increases in interconnectivity between different parts of the world. And today we are living in the most interconnected time in human history, where it is possible for people around the globe to communicate with each other instantaneously. And so the stage that I want to talk about today is the one that's been unfolding from around 1990 to the present. And that is the one that I've called digital globalization. Other people would just probably call this the global era. And so it's characterized by three big things. The rapid breakthroughs of computer technology and also telecommunication technology, the fall of the Soviet Union and the growth of international and global organizations, and also the reduction of barriers to international trade, business, and travel. So one of the first big things that really takes off, really before 1990, but continues going strong throughout the 1990s and the 2000s, is a rapid technological revolution. And at the core of this revolution is the exponential growth of computing power. And so this exponential growth of computing power was described in this interesting formulation known as Moore's law, where this guy, Moore, noticed a pattern, and that was that computing power doubles every year. And this pattern held basically from 1970 all the way to the 2000s. Some people say that Moore's law is beginning to slow down, or that is no longer holding, and that computer growth has been slowing down recently. But up until very recently, this was true. Computers got doubly powerful every single year. And if you look at that graph there, you'll see that whereas a single part of a computer's processor could hold only like a few thousand transistors in 1970, by 2005, that same area of a computer's processor could hold a billion transistors. So it went from a couple thousands to a billion in only 35 years. And this increase is going on still today. And so basically what this means is that the smartphone in your pocket right now is more powerful than the most powerful computer that existed back in the 1980s. So on top of the, or as a result of the growth of computing power, it has become much easier to share information. So basically we can upload information digitally and then send it and process it for basically no cost. Stuff like text, music, images, videos, and also numerical data can be processed and stored and sent almost for free. On top of this, increases in digital communication have made it much easier to connect people all across the world. Satellite communication, this crazy thing called the internet, and also cell phones have made it incredibly easy for individuals, businesses, and governments to stay in contact all around the world, which makes it much easier to run big global organizations. So on top of the changes in technology, we also see some important political changes that make it much easier to operate on a global level. So first of all, the big thing that kind of ushers in this new era of globalization is the fall of the Soviet Union. So before the fall of the Soviet Union, the world was divided up into two separate political and economic spheres. One led by the United States, characterized as capitalist, and one led by the USSR, characterized as communist. And so each of these spheres had a separate economy, a separate legal system, and a separate political system. And so there was a good deal of interconnection between these two spheres, but these two spheres themselves had very little interaction going on. So we were definitely not a fully globalized society at that point. After 1991, though, the world becomes increasingly regulated by a single set of international organizations. So for example, in the realm of international diplomacy, the United Nations reigns supreme and is an area where almost every nation can get together and share ideas, and where nations can express concern or other things for international problems. On top of this, systems for controlling international trade and finance have come up. The two most important ones of these are the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. So these are basically giant financial institutions that can give out money to different countries, give out loans, and they also set rules for international trade. And finally, there's a system of international law led by the International Court of Justice. So more and more countries are being held accountable for the same sorts of rules. And some countries, if they don't follow these laws, can be held responsible by the International Court of Justice. So if a country commits crimes against humanity, it is possible for them to go on trial in this international court. And so the significance of all of this is that most countries around the world today follow a relatively similar set of rules. And this makes it easier for individuals and for organizations from different nations to cooperate and to trade with one another. And the third big factor that characterizes the age of digital globalization is a big reduction in barriers to international trade and business. And so in the industrial era, most nations set up trade barriers to protect their national economy from global competition. So it was basically like each economy built a sort of like economic wall around themselves. And every country tried to produce as much of its own stuff as possible. So people in France drove French cars, people in Germany drove German cars, people in England drove English-made cars. And likewise, people in Germany ate German bread, people in France ate French bread, and people in England, I don't know what they ate, biscuits, I guess, or crumpets. But so anyway, each country had its own individual economy, and there was limited trade between these different areas. But in the age of digital globalization, the United States, the IMF, and the World Bank have all used their international power to remove trade barriers and to allow for a system of international free trade. And so this is where there are fewer barriers to trade and countries all trade with each other. And they believe that this had a number of important positive effects. And so basically the idea is that if everybody trades with everybody else, the economy will the world will be richer in general. And they believe this for a couple of reasons. One is they thought that free trade would allow resources and labor to flow wherever it was most needed. So if one country had too many workers but not enough jobs, those workers could go to the other country and work there, which would mean more people were working and making more stuff, which would mean there's more stuff for everybody, theoretically. Another idea that founded international free trade was that it would allow businesses to go and operate wherever it made the most sense. So if there was like one country that was particularly good for, I don't know, like growing bananas or whatever, the banana company would be able to go there and operate and then sell the bananas that it grew all over the world. Likewise for creating computers or cars or anything else. Companies can go wherever it makes the most sense and sell their stuff everywhere. And so as a result of this idea of international free trade, we've seen the rise of a number of free trade zones. And the two most important free trade zones are the North American Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA, and also the European Union. And so in these zones, there are very, very few barriers to trade, and goods and services can flow freely. So the North American Free Trade Agreement is an agreement between Mexico, Canada, and the United States that allows goods to flow freely and helps labor to move wherever it is most needed. And the European Union is a very ambitious experiment being undertaken by Western Europe to unite a whole bunch of different countries together into a single huge economic market. And so that means that goods from any of those countries you see in blue can flow freely to any other country. So for example, you can live in any one of these countries and get German cars, French fashion, Italian cheeses, Greek olives, English tea, all that stuff is accessible to you wherever you are. And the idea is that it means more stuff and more money for everybody. The system of international free trade and globalization has been both praised and criticized. People have praised it for saying that it would make the world richer, more understanding, and smarter. It would make the world more richer, supposedly, by allowing for more trade and more efficient production. It would make the world more understanding by allowing for increased communication between individuals. And it would make the world smarter by allowing for breakthroughs in science and business to spread around the world very rapidly. So if any business had a breakthrough, every other business around the world would have to adapt that breakthrough or go out of business. But there's also been a lot of criticism of international free trade and globalization. One, and perhaps the biggest, is that it creates an unequal world. And basically what people argue is that the system of international free trade allows the rich companies to exploit poor countries. And so basically what this means is that companies in the United States can set up sweatshops or factories in poorer countries and pay those people almost nothing, and then sell their goods in rich countries. And this allows for all sorts of problems with labor rights and human rights and stuff like that. Another problem that people have criticized it for is that it results in an unsustainable world. That all the rapid economic expansion and all the long-distance trade pollutes the planet and depletes natural resources. So like, for example, it uses up a bunch of resources to import bananas all the way from South America, because you have to pick those bananas and ship them, and all of that requires gas and other resources. And finally, people argue that it results in a less diverse world, where the rise of global commercialized culture destroys traditional cultural practices. So rather than cool little villages with their own unique products and practices, everybody everywhere goes to the same stores and speaks the same languages and does the same thing. And so you see a loss of different ways of living. Alright guys, so that is your video today. I'm sorry that it's long, but honestly it's a pretty complicated subject. So